Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It is Thursday. I'm going to do a quick recap of day 19, and then we're going to jump into day 20. But first, if you're watching on YouTube, you know the drill. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Click the little bell icon. Music fact of the day. What are the 4 biggest one-hit wonders of all time? Number 4, I'm Too Sexy by Right Said Fred. Number 3, Come On Eileen by Dexy's Midnight Runners. Number 2, Tainted Love by Soft Cell. And number 1, Macarena, Los Del Rio. Y'all all did that dance. You know you did. Yesterday's testimony was just very graphic. We had the medical examiner still on the stand from the day before, and he really got into the photos of the autopsies on JJ and Tylee. You guys can go watch yesterday's testimony from the medical examiner. I'll link that in the description of this episode. I really didn't feel comfortable talking about such graphic things in this episode, so I'm just going to let you guys choose if you want to listen or not. I'm going to just put up some footage from today as I'm going through this very quickly from yesterday. On the stand still was the medical examiner, Garth Warren. On toxicology for Tylee, there was nothing there that would explain her death. They sent Tylee's remains to the FBI for a forensic anthropology report to be done. On cross, Pryor literally is asking this guy questions from Tammy's autopsy, asking about heavy lungs. That's objected to. Judge Boyce tells him to move on. There really wasn't anything else that he asked. The next witness is Detective Ariel Werther with the Chandler PD. He works in robbery and homicide. He was there to enter in phone records from the day Charles Vallow was shot on July 11th. It's just throwing a lot of times out there. I can sum up his testimony really quickly here. Starting at 6:06 a.m. on the day Charles was shot and killed, Chad starts texting Lori. Another thing they noticed from the time when 911 was called and Lori returned home, it was only 12 minutes. And that was a big discrepancy based on what they had told police. What are some important times? At 7:32 a.m., Charles is near the house where he would be shot and killed. 7:33, Chad texts Lori. 7:50, Lori has Charles's phone and leaves the house. This is only 18 minutes after Charles arrived there. 2 minutes later, Alex calls Lori. 7:55 a.m., Lori is at Burger King. JJ is in the front seat. Tylee is in the back. 8:06 a.m., Alex again calls Lori. At 8:16, Lori went to a second Walgreens. She had went to one. It wasn't open. She ended up at this one. She's seen on camera buying flip-flops. I'm going to link that video in the description as well. At 8:20, she leaves that Walgreens. At 8:32, she's at JJ's school. And at 8:49, Lori and Tylee are back at the house wearing the flip-flops she bought. A couple of other things to note. Charles's phone stays with Lori and Alex pretty much all day until a detective asks for it. You know, they were all up in that phone reading text messages, emails, everything. At some point in the afternoon, Melanice calls Lori for a duration of 5 minutes and 58 seconds. 7:34 p.m. is when Chad calls the mortuary. They had some technical difficulties. He got off the stand, but I just combined his. But in between that, there was another witness, Tara Martinez from the Idaho State Police Forensic Services. She's a forensic scientist in the latent print division. Alex had a fingerprint card from the FBI, and the second cards were from the Gilbert PD. As far as prints on the duct tape around JJ's ankles, it was inconclusive. There was a print of Alex's on a black garbage bag as well as duct tape that was with JJ. Another print on the bag was developed. That was a right palm print of Alex Cox. The next witness from this morning, she is a DNA specialist, Catherine Dace. They took biological samples from Tylee, molars, and the rib, and then DNA from Lori. They took the same samples from JJ and then took a DNA sample from his biological dad, Todd. She looked at the uneven tape edges in case somebody tore off tape with their mouth and left DNA. She noted that decomposition fluid was all over the surface of the tape and the plastic. They didn't test it because they were really trying to find DNA from a suspect, but it would have been contaminated. Tylee's chain and pendant was negative for blood. There was a swab from a knife blade taken from the townhouse that was negative. She did DNA testing on the tools in the shed. Trigger warning, we are talking about her doing DNA testing on these tools. So if you're sensitive to that, you might want to click off now. She took 18 hand tools, including shovels, a garden hoe, a pickaxe, axes, shears, handsaws, post diggers, and she did blood testing on these tools. She did find presumptive positives on several of those tools, as well as charred human remains. On the testing, there was a request for blood and human remains. She explains to the jury that she found a lot of very small samples, but it would have been consumptive. It would have consumed the entire sample to do testing, so they didn't test those for DNA. I think one of the reasons is it would not allow the defense to have access to any sample to test independently. And it's possible that might not have been allowed to come in at trial for that very reason. So they really just wanted to zero in on confirming whether or not this biological evidence came from Tylee. On 4 different tools, she found what she thought to be human remains. They photographed that, and then they did some DNA testing. They also found ashes on some of the tools. On one of the shovels, she thought she saw human remains on the back lip. There was also green material on there with the remains, but that was not tested. The DNA results were that was Tylee's DNA on one of the shovels. On the pickaxe, she saw brown colored dirt. When she removed that, there was darker material underneath, so she collected that. The results were on the head of the pickaxe, there were fragments of human remains found, and she was able to get a partial DNA profile. One of the reasons potentially that she was only able to get a partial DNA profile is that thermal damage can damage the DNA. The results of that, Tylee was a potential contributor. It was 159 trillion times more likely to be Tylee than anybody else. On the handle of the pickaxe, 2 areas tested positive for blood. The DNA on the handle matched Tylee. Those results 604 octillion times more likely to be Tylee than anybody else. She explained that some of the hairs that were collected, as far as JJ went, they did not result in any DNA profiles that she read. They were sent to another lab in Virginia, but we do know one of the hairs tested belonged to Lori Vallow. On cross, did you test all 18 tools? Yes. He asked how many were positive for blood. The first batch, there were 10 tools, 9 had small potential blood stains. So he asked if she tested them. She explained these were too small and it would have consumed the sample. He asked how DNA gets on tools, which is primary transfer or direct contact, or secondary transfer, which is transferred from another source. She said dried staining is much harder to transfer. The 8 remaining tools, none of those had blood or DNA. Pryor asked if it was her understanding the tools came from Chad's garage. Yes. He asked when she got possession of those, and that was on July 30th of 2020. He asked her the date of the burials, and it was September of 2019. He calls them the allegations. Really, it's the day the kids were buried. There were 10 months that elapsed from September to when these were tested. He says from July to September, we don't know who had contact with the tools or how the DNA got on there. No. She explains that any one of the Daybell's DNA could have been on those tools because they were found in the garage and the ownership of them are not in question. But Pryor points out there's no certainty to say who handled them, and the witness says no. Pryor asked if they ever found any of Chad's DNA on the tools. She said she didn't run those, but what she did test did not have Chad's DNA. He asked if she found prints on the necklace or the charm. She said she doesn't do fingerprints. She did find a small sample on the necklace, but it would have been consumptive and they did not test it. He goes back to assuming Chad's DNA would be on these tools in his garage. She said the request that was made to her for testing was only for blood and human DNA. You have to make a decision of which test you're going to do because it would have consumed the sample. He asked if she got a request to do DNA testing for Alex Cox. Again, it would have consumed the sample and they didn't get a request for it. He asked if she looked for DNA on the handles and she said to swab, it could have destroyed any latent prints that were on that handle. They were told not to do that because, again, it would consume the sample. He asked if they tested for DNA or prints from his favorite person, Melanie Gibb or David Warwick. You were testing DNA in general on these tools. Were you just targeting Tylee? She said they tested all of their reference samples, which did include Melanie Gibb, Lori, Alex, David Warwick, all those people, Chad. On redirect, Rob Wood says, what is consumptive testing? And she said they would need to use the entire sample. So, for instance, a small blood sample or a root of the hair, you get one try at it and that's it. She's never been on a large case like this where she would test all the DNA samples. They try not to overly consume evidence to test for the same thing. He asked if Gibb was one of the test subjects she compared. Yes. She will stay under subpoena from the state. The next witness is Colin Nesbitt from the Kawaii Police Department. His first contact with Lori was on January 5th, 2020. They served Lori with those documents when she was poolside with Chad. They recorded that service. She was given a copy and asked if she had any questions. He also gave a copy of that to the Rexburg PD. In the video, you see Lori and Chad at the pool. They ask Lori, how's it going? She says, hi. They ask, are you Chad and Lori? They say yes. They hand her the paperwork. She reads it. Chad inches a little closer, leaning over, trying to read it too. Lori at one point just stops and looks at the officers. They asked if she has any questions. She shakes her head no, and that was it. That was the order to produce Tylee and JJ to the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare in Rex. She didn't. Ultimately was arrested in February of 2020 for not doing so. They also executed a search warrant on January 26th, the next day. Chad and Lori were driving their rental car. They were going to the Kauai Beach Resort. They initiated a traffic stop at the resort. Lori was driving. Chad was in the passenger seat. They both were taken out of the car. They also gave her the cash in there. They looked through her purse with that search warrant and they found one of Tylee's bank cards. They knew Tylee was missing, so they did not give that to Lori. And they put it in the front seat of the car. They show exterior photos of the Ford Explorer from the evidence warehouse. Interior photos, there's 2 water bottles. There's a purse with a cell phone in the side pocket, Tylee's debit card. In the bottom of a floorboard was a bag. In that were birth and death certificates, as well as the marriage certificate, the patriarchal blessing Chad gave to Alex Cox, and the rental agreement for the townhome in Rexburg. There was a suitcase in the back seat. They seized a backpack with 2 computers, 3 iPads, several documents, the book Visions of Glory. They show close-up photos of 2 iPads. One has JJ written in red on the back. She had 17 copies of death certificates for Charles Vallow, which is a very high number. There was also a rental property printout for the condo there in Hawaii. They show photos of JJ and Tylee's birth certificate for JJ, the original one before the adoption, and the one after. There were several copies of those. There were social security cards for JJ and Tylee, Madison school receipts for JJ. The rental agreement, by the way, for Rexburg had Lori, Tylee, and JJ's name on it. That bag with the envelope of cash in the backpack, that had $10,500 in it. There was also a clinical summary with sticky notes. The person who had been seen was Lori Vallow. They executed the condo search warrant on January 26th of 2020. They found rubber wedding bands, and on cross. Pryor asked if Chad was trying to look at the papers to see what it was. Yes. He says, you talk about the debit card in the driver's side seat. Who was driving? Lori. Did Chad say anything? No. Was he cooperative? Yes. Was there anything of evidentiary value found in the passenger side? He says no. On redirect, did Chad ask why they were being stopped or the search warrant? No. You were asked if anything was found on the passenger side. Was there in the back? Yes. What was that? Patriarchal blessing from Chad Daybell. The next witness on the stand, he's with the FBI, Benjamin Dean. He started on the case in late March of 2020. He was reviewing tips that came from the press release on March 5th by the FBI and the Rexburg PD. This release made public that Tylee was last seen in Yellowstone National Park, and they asked people who were there that day to send photos and videos in. They got around 600 to 800 tips. Some had text only, others had media files attached. He also assisted in reviewing data extracted from devices seized from Chad's house at the search warrant on January 3rd, 2020. He reviewed 2 Blu-ray discs that had data from storage devices taken from Chad's residence. Once that data had been extracted, he looks at the names of the device user. The one we're talking about right now is Tammy Daybell's device. There were incoming text messages addressed to her. She was listed as the user, and there were outgoing messages introducing herself as Tammy or signing off of emails as Tammy. There were group messages with the kids and their spouses, and there were also device notifications showing new posts in a Facebook group that they must have made just for their family. There were images on the device of Tammy with Chad, with their kids and grandkids. He noticed all communications stopped on that phone October 18th, 2019, the day before first responders went to the house and found her dead. They talk about September 9th, 2019, the day that Tylee was buried. Tammy's phone got a text that caught his attention from Chad. At 10:53 a.m., Chad texts Tammy, "Well, I've had an interesting morning. Felt I should burn all the limb debris by the fire pit before it got too soaked by the coming storms. While I did so, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. Fun times." At 10:56, just 3 minutes later, he texted again, "Gonna shower now and go right for a while at BYU. Tammy doesn't respond back till 1:47 p.m., and she just says, "Good for you." 1 minute later, at 1:48, Chad says, "I'm back home now." He noticed these messages were longer and more detailed than what they normally texted each other. Typically, it was just short, very to the point about when the other would be coming home, getting food for animals, that kind of thing. The date of that raccoon text caught his attention because he said that Chad told Tammy these things about having a fire, shooting an animal, burying that animal. Those were things he did on the day after Tylee was last seen alive. On Cross, he didn't review Chad's messages. He only reviewed Tammy's, and there were frequent messages between Tammy and the family. At the time, Garth was the only child that was living at home with his parents. Pryor asked if animals were ever mentioned in text before this, and the witness says a few times. Those outgoing messages on Tammy's phone stopped on October 18th, the night before she was killed. There were incoming messages after she passed. Pryor asked if he knows how long Chad and Tammy were married, and of course, the witness doesn't. But he asked the witness if he has reviewed all text messages throughout their whole marriage. No. He didn't look at any other devices of Tammy's. On a redirect, were you given devices from their whole marriage? No. The next witness, Janet Anderson. She used to live near Rexburg and was the secretary at the school where Tammy taught at. She saw Tammy off and on throughout the day. She describes Tammy as friendly, said she was never sick, never talked about feeling bad, and she calls Tammy the Energizer Bunny. In addition to being a librarian, Tammy had a lot of roles at the school. She did lunch duty, computer labs, and help with recess. She couldn't believe when she heard that Tammy had passed because she had just seen her the day before at 3:45. Tammy was happy and laughing, and Tammy and her daughter Emma, who also worked at the same school, stopped by her office, and Tammy was talking about wanting to hang curtains in their computer lab. The witness just couldn't understand how this happened. She said Tammy was always on the go and had energy all day long. She didn't notice Tammy gaining or losing any weight. On cross, he asked if she remembers telling Officer Mattingly Tammy kept to herself. The witness says, meaning she did her job and didn't talk about her personal life to her. He asked if she would agree that Tammy's confidant at school was Emma, her daughter, and the witness disagrees. She said Tammy had a lot of friends at work and talked a lot to other people. He asked if Tammy and Emma spent a lot of their downtime together. She doesn't think so. He asked about the book fair Tammy was working on the last day before she died and asked if it's a big job to prepare for that. She said that book fair wasn't until the next week, so there really wasn't much to be done on that Friday. Him and this book fair, y'all, he acts like they're killer book fairs that just make librarians drop over. The next witness, Tammy Gee. She's a coworker of Tammy's. She worked with Tammy for around 3 years and talked to her about 3:30 the Friday before she died. They were talking about one of the witness's students, and she said they talked just like they would any random day. She described Tammy as kind, friendly, animated, and said her energy level was great. Of course, she was shocked when she got a text from the school principal the next day informing her that Tammy was dead. She never saw anything that would indicate Tammy was sick. On cross, of course, let's talk about that book fair. She said she really just doesn't remember it at all. When asked if Tammy was private about her personal life, she said, I wouldn't say that. Not really. The last witness of the day, Pamela Peebles, co-worker of Tammy's for 2 or 3 years. She said Tammy was always running around doing her library work or computer things with the kids. She shared recess duty with Tammy twice a week. She said Tammy knew each kid by their name and would just run around and interact with them all day. Tammy loved those kids and they loved her very much. She said Tammy was a great friend and coworker. Another teacher was the one who told her Tammy was dead. They had just had a recess duty 2 days before on that Thursday. She never saw anything that would make her think anything was wrong with Tammy, and she thought Tammy was healthy. She knew that Tammy was training for a race, and at that recess duty on that Thursday before she died, they talked about Tammy's health. Tammy said she felt she was in the best shape of her life. She said she had been losing weight, and Pam said she told her she was a little jealous of that. Tammy talked about changing some of her habits. Now, at this point, Pryor gets wise and realizes her friends have got her back. No cross. That's it for today. They closed a little bit early because there's going to be some renovations going on in the courthouse. So we will pick back up tomorrow on Friday. So ready for the weekend, y'all. Can't get here fast enough. And until tomorrow, you guys have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.